For this next video, we are going to take a look at our intro to modeling. We're first going to start by opening up our modeling window for the first time. Let's go ahead and select this little cube here to get that open. Once we do that, we're going to get a window that pops up that says New Erection View. This is going to have us create a view to open so that way we can get into our model to start working. If we take a look at sheet S5, we can see it calls out the bottom of base plate as our 99-foot 2 elevation. For this, let's call this new view AB plan. And then for our elevation, we're going to put in 99-foot 2. For this, I'll just go 99-2. And that little dash there signifies that foot-inch separator. For this, we do not need to add in our foot or inch symbols here. We can just go 99-2, and the system will know that is 99 foot 2 inches. For this, we're going to save this erection view as a primary. Next is our drawing grid line pen color. This is going to be the color that the grid will show up on our drawing. Below that, we have an option for modeling grid line pen color. We can specify for it to match that drawing pen, use the side options, or we can set a custom color for this new grid line. Being that this is a plan view, we wouldn't really see that unless we open up an elevation view, but for this example, we're going to leave this all default. We can specify our line type. We're going to check on make this my default view. This is going to open up by default every time we come into this. And then below that, we have for detailing. For detailing marks the views for a separate for detailing list when looking at the views and modeling and when you're detailing your erection views. Marking that for detailing is just going to place that in a separate list, and it doesn't matter either way if that's marked for detailing or not, we still have the ability to detail this erection view. In this case, I am going to go ahead and check for detailing, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Now that I've said OK here, we can see now it has opened up our modeling, made all of our tools active, and then we can see two construction lines in here. These two construction lines that appear are your intersection of 0, 0 at the current elevation we are at. For this, we're going to start by looking at our toolbars and ribbons. We're going to go and start at the bottom and work our way up. Along the bottom, we have our static toolbar. At the far left, we have what is called our button bindings. In here, there is 3 selections. The bottom has a left and a right, which will correlate with the left and the right click. The upper command is our middle click. These will display what the mouse buttons will do while running any command. To the right of this, we have our status line. This will display any information pertaining to what your mouse is hovering over or what a command is looking for you to select or do. So anytime you think that the model may be frozen, definitely look at the status line and see if it is asking you any questions pertaining to the last tool you ran. To the right of this, we have our current view. So this will display whatever last view was opened. To the right of that is our elevation. This is going to display the current elevation that you are working in. Now we need to be careful because we can change elevations without changing the views, and by doing that, the elevation would read different than what your view elevation may be saved at. To the right of this, we have what's called our selection filter. This selection filter is going to allow us to set what we want to be able to select while working in the model. If I expand this, we can see from the top down we have default, legacy default, all, by expression, by status display, custom, edit custom, and then everything else is alphabetical. So whether we want to select beams, columns, members, materials, any of those are going to be able to be selected in this selection filter. This is something we'll dive into deeper as we are working in the model. To the right of this is our depth checking. This allows you to only see a certain amount of the model based on the view you have open. By default, we can see that that is set to look 3 foot in and 3 foot out with that depth check on. If this is unchecked when a view is created, that view will then be saved with that unchecked. You would see infinitely in and out of that view. To the right of this, we have our status display, where we can turn that on and off and then select the status that is set there. However, we aren't going to take a deep dive into this until a later video. Next up, we have our status display. This is where we would go to set our status display. To the right of that little magnifying glass is going to be our status display, and that's where we would go to create the status display. To the right of that, we have our selected items count, and this is going to display the number of items that are currently selected. On the right hand side, that very tall part of this window, as shown here, is going to be our model tree. This model tree shows a list of all the members and the material that are currently visible in your open view, and this will be affected by your depth check. You can change the view by to sort by member piece mark, member number, or material piece mark. Below that, we have our steel weight. If I select the icon, that is going to update or refresh that. Below that is going to be our reinforcing weight, which will show the tonnage of concrete members. To the right of that, we have then our pin member ends, which will allow us to set member pins, but in this case, for this training, we will not get into pins. To the right of that, we have auto process after modeling operation, and then to the right of that is our process within member edit. On our two sidebars here, we can see these little triangles. If I select this, this is going to collapse that right side and the left side toolbars to expand our modeling window and make that larger. We can always just click on that again and expand that out. The left side toolbar here is going to show both our recently used tools as well as our pin tools. As we use the different tools, it will automatically populate here, as well as if we pin anything, it would also be shown and populated there. And then we have at the top what is called our ribbons. At the top right of this modeling window, we have the option to select what role we are acting as in the current modeling session. In here, we can see we have connection designer, detailer, drafter, estimator, fabricator, modeler, review, site planner, and customize. Each role will have tools pertaining to that specific role and how it can be used within the model. For example, in this case, detailer is what we will be using. We can see the different pages and sections and tools. So looking left to right here, our pages are as follows. We have layout, members, material, drawings, tools, display, import, export, and reports. To the right of these pages, we do see this little search field. This is going to allow us to search all of our tools within SDS2 by name. We will take a look at using this more and more in the future. If we wanted to, we could set up our own ribbon. With this, that means you can create your own from scratch or edit an existing one. To do so, you can access this tool two different ways. You can either go to the home screen, then to utilities, and then from utilities you can go customize interface, or from the modeling, we can drop this down and go to customize. This does bring up our customize interface tool and will allow us to adjust or create our own roles. If I wanted to, just to take a look at this, I'm going to go to Detailer, Modeling, and then we can see our role information. So what is the name of our role? What is the environment we're working in? What is our ribbon configuration? Keyboard configuration, and shortcut menu configuration. If I wanted to, I could select Edit next to my ribbon configuration. And in here, we can see our ribbon with all of our pages, sections, and tools. If I ever wanted to, I could come in here and add different tools to this. Let's say maybe I wanted to add exit to my current ribbon. If I select the plus symbol next to exit, we can see that is now shown under our section. I don't physically see it in this views and grids section because it exceeds the number of icons shown. However, I do see this drop down here, and if I expand that, we can now see exit. If I wanted to see that for sure, I can hit this little up arrow to change where that is shown at in this ribbon. So I could have that be first. But if I decide I don't want that after the fact, I can just hit this little minus button here, and that removes that. So we see we have different pages. So we have our layout, members, materials, drawings, tools, display, import, export, and reports. If I wanted to, I could always hit this plus symbol and add my own, and I could call this, maybe I want to call this training. Now we can see I have my own page there called training, and then I could create a section. So I just hit the little plus symbol, and I could call this training section, for example. Now we can see that's there. If I wanted another one, I could hit the plus, and I could call this training section 2, and we can see it updates. Now I could always go back to my section and add my different tools, and we can see it populates that. As we're creating our sections, we can specify how many rows and columns of these icons we would want to see. We can add a drawer to that if we wanted to. We can always go back and change our number of rows and columns as we are adding more tools. When we are adding items, we do have the option to specify how many rows it spans and how many columns it will span. Do we want to display our label, our image, or both? And then if it is a different tool, we can specify what image we want to use, and then our image size, whether that is small or large. If we are adding a drawer, for example, I'll just create one and we'll leave it called tool drawer. Maybe I only want to see that in 2 rows and columns. I could change the name of our tool drawer and specify how big that is going to be. So maybe I want that to be 2 columns. We can see it now stretches across that whole section. I could then go in and specify if I wanted that to be a label, an image, or both. And then I have the option to choose the image size, and then the drawer type. If I check on recent item, that will always show whatever the last tool ran out of that drawer was. In this case, I'm going to get rid of this whole training page, so I'll just hit this minus button. One thing to note here is if I'm trying to add a tool to a section that already has this. So for example, we see our save area is already here. Well, we don't see that in our file item group anymore. If I go to that, we can see that is not there. So it is automatically removed from our item group. For example, if I add the exit, we can see that is no longer shown over here. We cannot have more than one instance of the same icon in a section. If we wanted to, we could add another section and have that tool, but that is going to be our only way to have that same icon here. We're going to go ahead and close this and save no. I don't want to save those changes I made. And the next thing we're going to talk about is our keyboard shortcuts, as we can see our keyboard configuration here. SDS2 does not have a command line, but we do have keyboard shortcuts. These are all listed in our custom interface area. This will allow us to see our keyboard configuration and edit this if we want. So if I select edit, we can see our different key commands as well as the tools. For this training, I have created a document that will list our keyboard shortcuts that can be accessed in our additional references section for both modeling as well as drawing editor. When we are creating our shortcuts there, if the shortcut already exists, you must delete it first and then you can reuse those key combinations. You can have multiple key combinations work for the same tool. You can't have one single key combination work for multiple tools. These keyboard shortcuts are going to be saved and stored within your data directory, so anybody that is working out of the same data directory can use that keyboard configuration. For this, I'm going to go ahead and say OK or cancel. Doesn't matter either way since we aren't saving those changes. So we're going to start looking at adding our construction lines. Construction lines are used in SDS2 to generate basic selectable points that we can use for locating exact locations in our model. For this, we're going to add an infinite construction line. Let's start by going here inside of our layout page. In the layout section, we have construction line add. Again, I can see this by hovering over this. We get a little balloon that explains the tool. It shows CA as our keyboard shortcut. We have the option to pin this, and we can look at the bottom here in our status line to see that it is calling out our construction line add. One other way we could run this is if I search up here for construction line add, we can see any construction line tools are shown. So I can run that any of those ways. I'm going to go ahead and select this. And once we did that, we can see we now have a locate page here at the top. This contextual menu will show up anytime the locate tools could be used. This is going to include all of our snaps as well as the tools, including our toggle UCS, our XYZ location, and our X, Y, and Z offsets. So our snaps with construction lines. First, we have base construction line, and this is going to allow us to offset one construction line from another construction line that has been selected. So I'm going to select this, and I'm going to select this vertical running construction line. Looking at S1 or S2, we can see B is 25 foot off of grid A. So if I come in here, once I select my grid line to base it off of, we get a window that asks us for a dimension, a repeat factor, lock base position, and the pen color. For my dimension from construction line, I'm going to type in 25-0. That is our distance from A to B in this example from S1 or S2. We could repeat this. So right now with a repeat factor of 1, it's only going to add in one construction line. If we wanted to, we could repeat this 3 different times to get to B, C, and D. So I'm going to type in 3. And then looking at that lock base position, we do not want to use this tool for this example. The lock base position will always add the construction line based off of the construction line that was initially selected. For that, we could then go 20-foot 0, and it'd add one 20 foot to the right of that construction line. If I type in 25-foot 0 and add in another one, then that's going to add it 25 foot based off the initial one, so really only 5 foot to the right of the first construction line we added. So again, for this example, we are going to leave this unchecked. We could specify a color, but in this case, I'm going to leave mine navy. And I'm going to go ahead and select add. We can see it has now added 3 construction lines. Now, I could select the red X to get out of this command. However, being that we have already added this and we didn't lock the base position, we can add in the construction line that we need for grid line E. So I'm going to type in 20-foot 0, and I can add either hit an add or the add plus. So add is just going to add whatever that dimension is. So whether we typed in a negative or a positive value here, it'll go left or right. If we go add minus, that's going to send it to the left, add plus to the right, and add plus / minus is going to do both. It's going to add it in the plus and the minus direction. As you can see in the lock base position note, it does say that it is automatic for your add plus and minus. So if we add plus and minus, we're going to add our next construction line off of that point. So in this case, I'm going to either hit add or add plus. Next, we're going to take a look at adding a finite construction line. So I'm going to go ahead and hit exit here. And as you can see, if we look at our status line here, it shows add construction line. That's telling me I am still in the command. I can either hit escape on the keyboard or right click. Either way will close out of that command. So let's continue adding our construction lines for grid line 2 as well as grid line 1 and then 1.9 and 2.1. We will worry about adding 8.3 at a later time. So continuing, we'll just select construction line add. Based off of this horizontal construction line. And we can see it's 27-foot 6 we can go a repeat factor of 2. I can hit enter. And then if we take a look, it is 20 foot from grid line 3 to 2.1, 15 to 1.9, and 20 foot. Or we can select this middle construction line and we can go 7'6" and go add plus or minus. So however you want to add that one is no issue. Next, we're going to take a look at adding a finite construction line. For this, we escape out of the command. So from our layout page here, in the layout section, we can select finite construction line add, or again, we can search that, or we can use CF on the keyboard. Once I select this, the 2 points I select is going to be the points that the construction line will go in between. So if I use the base construction line point locator here and base it off of one of these, well, because that is not finite, this next construction line would also not be finite. It would be infinite. If I use either my intersection of construction lines or my auto point, either one, I could come in here and select different points along that. And we can see I now have my construction line in there at that angle. So basically, it's just going to add a construction line between the points selected. So again, if I select that and rerun that, I could come in here and just select any point I wanted, and we can see it's added in there. Now let's say I didn't want to keep this line. I can edit a construction line. By going to my search, I can type in construction line edit, select that, and then it's going to ask me which construction line do I want to edit. Well, I can select that, or if I hold down my shift key, it'll allow me, if we look at our point locator here, if I hold down my shift key, looking at my button binding here at the bottom, we can see that now shows select plus. So I could go in and select both of those if I wanted. But in this case, I'm only going to select one, and then I'm going to hit enter on the keyboard, or I can go right click and say OK. This then brings up my construction line edit window. This allows me to select whatever construction line I want to edit, and I can do things like changing the color, unchecking finite, so maybe I want that to be red, say OK, and we can see it changed that. Another way I can go about editing these is changing my selection filter here to construction lines, and then I can just double click on that or select, right click and edit. I could then go in and uncheck finite and say OK, and now we can see that is now infinite. So again, I can just single select that, right click and edit, and that brings up our construction line edit as well. If I uncheck finite and say OK, we can see it's now infinite. If I edit that, check that back on and say OK, because that was a finite construction line to begin with, we can see that it does go back to that finite state. However, if I tried that on this construction line, we can see that is grayed out. In this case, I don't want that, so we can delete this out one of two ways. To delete this, being that I have my selection filter set to construction lines, I can just select the one I don't want and hit delete on the keyboard. Or I can do construction line and instead of edit, I can search erase, select the one I don't want, and hit enter, and now we can see that has been removed. One thing to note with the selection filter is you will want to make sure you turn that back to default. Otherwise, when you continue working, it'll only ever select construction lines. So once we get members added in here, that is not going to be able to be selected. Next, let's take a look at our ruler command. To look at our ruler command, we're going to go to our tools page, and then in the measure section, we can use the ruler tool, which is the tape measure. And when I select that, it's going to allow me to select 2 points and tell me the exact distance between those 2 points selected. So I'll select just 2 points on here, and we can see at the bottom it brought up a window, and it says our distance is 50 foot 0 and 600 inches. We can see 50 foot 0, 600 inches in the x-axis, and then our y and our z-axis are zeros. I'll say OK, And if I rerun that command and select something here at an angle, we can see it's 93 foot 0 and 1/16. Well, we can see it did do some rounding there because of our dimensional precision from our setup. If we take a look at our x-axis, we can see that's 75 foot 0 and 55 foot 0 in the y. So we can use this tool to get pretty accurate measurements as needed. However, being that we selected a point there on this angle, if I just select from that same vertex and go straight down or up, we can see that then gives us an angle dimension. If I take a look at this angle button here, we can see it's 53.7462 degrees. So just selecting 2 points from your vertex and repeating that vertex, that's going to give you that angled dimension. Again, I can say OK and right click to close out of that command. The next thing we're going to take a look at is adding our grid lines. Creating grid lines inside of SDS2 is basically just going to be another way or another word for creating our views. These views can be open and can be used to model in members as well as detailed to get our elevation views of the model. Adding our grid lines, we need to go to our Layout tab, and then in our Views/Grids section, we can see our grid line add. Or we can select GS on the keyboard, or again, we can use our search tool. So I'm going to select this, and then it's going to ask us to select 2 points. By default, our point locator is set to our intersection of construction lines. The order in which we pick the points for our grid lines will affect how these views come out. The points we pick will also be our extents, so we do need to be careful when we select that because any member we add outside of that will not be seen. Once the points are selected, we are going to be then asked to name that view. So let's take a look at creating grid line 3. In this example, or for this training, I'm going to select from left to right. And as you can see, that does look up or north on this project. If I went right to left, we can see that then looks down or to the south. For this training, we do not want that, so I'm going to go ahead and add mine from left to right. Doing so brings up our view name, so we're going to call this 3. We have an option to auto pin to this view, which will allow members to auto pin if you do not have your member pins disabled by default. But again, we aren't going to get into pins for this training. We have an option to make this finite or not. Finite grid lines will only go to the points you picked, and if that is unchecked when adding the view, your grid line names will extend to the edge of your modeling area. In this case, I'm going to leave mine checked. Next, we have our grid bubble setback, and this is used for finite grid lines to set how far the grid bubbles are held back from the points you picked. This value is a distance value. So I will leave mine at the default 6 foot 0. And next is our relative view depth. We have a top and a bottom, and this is going to set what elevations do we want to see this view from. If we take a look here really quick, on sheet S2, we can see our top of steel is 126 foot 0. So to be safe, I'm going to give myself a few extra feet. I'm going to go for my top at 130 foot 0. And then for my bottom, I'm just going to drop that down to 90 foot 0. This is just going to say how far we are going to be able to see this grid line. If we are anywhere below 90 foot or above 130 foot, we would not see this grid line. Next, we have our erection view type. We have primary, secondary, dimension only, or placement only. If I take a look at this image here, we can see primary is going to be our topmost grid line. Secondary is then going to be dropped below that, or have the option to be dropped below that, and then add the dimensions between primaries and the secondaries. Dimension only erection views are going to place a dimension in there, but not get any of the grid markers, and then placement only are not going to be shown on those drawings at all. In this case, grid line 3 is going to be a primary, so we will leave that set that way. Next, we're going to take a look at our depth check. And this is how far in and out of that view we are going to see when we have that view open. Again, we just want to see 3 foot in, 3 foot out by default, so that's okay. And then we have our drawing grid line pen color. So again, that's going to be the color that this grid comes in on the drawing. We have the option to change that in the model if we don't want it to match or we want to use our side options, and the grid line type. And then we have the option to make it the default view and for detailing. In this case, I'm going to select for detailing and say OK. We can see that has now added our grid line 3. Now for grid line 2, I could come in here and select the same points like we did, or I can use my base grid line tool. This base grid line allows me then to select the grid line that I want to base this off of, and then I can go in and specify a distance. So from grid line 3, I'm going to go 27 foot 6, and I'm going to call this grid line 2. As you can see, it remembered our relative view depth, the view type, the depth check, and then I'm going to check for detailing and hit add. And then from there, we can see it remembers those values before. We're going to change our view name to grid 1. And below, we need to make sure we check on for detailing again and select add. Next, we're going to take a look at adding in our vertical running grid lines. So for this, I'm going to cancel out of this window, and I'm going to go grid line add. And this time I need to just change my point locator back to the intersection of construction line. And in this case, I'm going to go from bottom to top. So that way we are looking to the west, and we're going to call this grid line A. Again, we need to make sure our bottom is from 90 foot 0 and our top is at 130 foot 0. And then mark that for detailing. Again, I can use the base grid line tool, select grid line A. I can go 25 foot 0, call that grid line B, check on for detailing and add. We'll go, the next one is 25 foot as well, and that's C. Check on for detailing, add. View name D is also 25 foot 0, mark that for detailing and add. And then view name E for detailing, but we do need to change the dimension to 20 foot 0. I'm going to go and select add, and now we can see we have those grid lines in there. The next thing we're going to take a look at is adding in our 1.9 and our 2.1. For this, I'm going to go ahead and do add grid line, but instead of using base grid line, because we don't want it to go all the way through, I'm just going to use the intersection of construction lines, and I'm going to add this from C to E. So I'll select my 2 points, again left to right, call that 1.9, and I'm going to leave those 90 foot 0 and 130 foot 0. Mark that for detailing, say OK. I could use the base grid line, or I can just go in and select my 2 points and call that 2.1, and then check on marked for detailing. So now we have our grid lines in here. Now let's say when I'm adding a grid line, maybe I added this one and called it B.1. And I didn't mean to, I meant to just call that B. Now I can see I have two right on top of each other. To delete a view, I can just hit delete view, select that, and then I could grab B.1. Well, let's say I accidentally deleted B. If I want to just rename that, I can do this one of two ways. I can hit the open view, select B.1, and hit rename, and I can just call that B. Or I can go through my utility functions to do that from our home screen. We can now see that is grid line B. Now if I hit open view, we can see my show for detailing is not checked. So that's telling me grid line B was unchecked when I created that for the detailing. We don't see grid line B in here. So what I can do is I can either go in and re-add that and call that grid line B, and I'll adjust my bottom and our top elevations. And then mark that for detailing and say OK. And it's going to ask me if I want to replace that. So in this case, I'll say yes. And then I just right click to close out of that command. Or if I change my selection filter to grid lines, I could then double click on the line itself and make whatever changes I need to there. Now, you got to make sure you double click on the grid line itself and not the grid bubbles, as I cannot select those here. Again, we'll want to return that back to our default. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is adding curved grid lines. So here in our layout page, under the views and grids, we have this drop down or combo. We can go add curved 3-point or add curved radius. When we go to add that, if I just run our add curved grid 3 points, I can then go in and select my 2 points and then set the third point to determine our radius. I could give it a name. Maybe I just want to call this test. Again, I could specify our relative view depths, if I want to auto pin, the direction view type, everything that way. But in this case, I'm just going to say OK, and we can see test is in there. The other way is our add curved radius. So it says locate our radius point. And then I could come in and specify a radius and everything that way. In this case, I'm just going to hit cancel. And I'm actually going to go ahead and delete out our curved grid line. Now to delete that, again, I can just hit delete view, select my test view, and say OK. And now that has been removed. And the last thing we're going to take a look at in this video is adding our plan views. To add a plan view, we need to go inside of our navigate section here. We'll just select our plan view button. When I select this, this is going to allow me to specify a reference elevation. So remember, we created our AB plan at 99'2". If we take a look at sheet S1, we can see second floor elevation is 114'6". So in here, we're going to type in reference elevation of 114'6". I'm going to say OK. Now to view or to confirm that that changed to the correct elevation, we can see here at the bottom our elevation says 114'6", but our view still shows as AB plan. We just need to make sure that we go in and save this view. Because we haven't saved this view, we change into that elevation. Well, we didn't save over anything, so our AB plan is still 99'2". We just have to create or save that view at this elevation. To do so, we'll just hit our Save View button. And then we could call this second floor. Once we have that all typed in there the way we want it, we can go ahead and say OK. And now we can see our view shows second floor and the elevation 114'6". So we'll go ahead and do this for our roof framing plan as well. If we take a look at sheet S2, we can see our roof framing plan is 126'0". So again, we'll hit plan view. We'll type in 126'0" and say OK. And then we can hit save view as, and we'll call this roof framing plan. Say OK, and now we can see roof framing plan. We can see that's expanding beyond, so we just see roof framing, and then we see the elevation is 126'0". The last view we'll create for right now is on sheet S4, and that is going to be our mezzanine level. So again, I'll go plan view, and that shows at 107'8". Say OK. Save view as, and we'll call this mezzanine. So I have that in there. I'll say OK, and now we can see we have that view mezzanine. If I want to take a look at my different views, I can simply select my open view icon to take a look and see what views are in here. I can double click on AB plan and we see that elevation changes. Another way I can do this is Control O on the keyboard to open that, and we can open up our different views. So again, second floor we see is at 114'6". Now if I would have saved or not deleted out that curved grid line, I could try opening that up. However, curved grid lines do not create actual views that you can open. Another easy way we can go about opening an elevation view from a plane view is just by double clicking on our grid bubble, as long as our selection filter is set to default. If I double click on that, we can see it now opened up view B, and we can see all of our other views in here. In this case, I could double click on second floor, and that takes me right to our second floor view.